He waited 60 years for this moment. Golden anniversary, 50 friends and family, his wife beside him, his son about to make a toast. And then he stood up, held a single photograph above his head and said the three words that destroyed everything. This changes everything. 80 guests, one candle-lit room, a lifetime of secrets burning in a single frame. Because the man in that photo wasn't his client. The man in that photo was his son-in-law's biological father. This is the story of a 72-year-old man who kept a secret for 30 years, a secret buried in a single photograph, a secret that would explode at the most public moment of his life. His golden anniversary, his wife beside him, his son-in-law about to raise a glass, and then the photograph came out. Why did he wait 6 decades to speak? Because the truth wasn't just about paternity. It was about betrayal, about a business rivalry that simmered for decades, and about a woman caught between two men. That night in the candle-lit dining room, he didn't just reveal a biological fact. He detonated a family, and the fallout would touch everyone in that room. Arthur Vasquez built his life the same way he built his business, brick by brick, deal by deal, with a handshake and a ledger. He started with a small construction supply company in 1974, just him and a pickup truck. By 1995, he owned 3 warehouses and employed 60 people. He married Alina in 1974, the same year he started the business. They had one daughter, Isabella, in 1978. She was the center of everything. Every birthday party, every school play, every college graduation, Arthur was there. He was the kind of father who read bedtime stories in Spanish and English, who taught her to drive stick shift on a dirt road behind the warehouse. And when she fell in love with a young architect named Mateo Reyes, Arthur approved. Mateo was sharp, ambitious, hardworking. He came from a modest family, no father in the picture. His mother, Ramona, raised him alone. Arthur respected that. He saw himself in Mateo. He even offered him a job at the company. But there was a problem, one Arthur didn't see until it was too late. Mateo's mother had worked as a secretary for Arthur's biggest client at the time, a man named Victor Ortega. Victor Ortega was a developer. He owned half the commercial real estate in the county. He was ruthless, charming, and deeply competitive. Arthur and Victor started as partners on a shopping center project in 1982. Within 3 years, they were bitter rivals. Victor tried to underbid Arthur on contracts. He spread rumors about Arthur's materials being substandard. He once showed up at a city council meeting with falsified inspection reports. Arthur won in court, but the fight cost him 2 years of growth. The hostility became personal. Victor had an affair with his secretary around 1980. That secretary was Ramona. She got pregnant. Victor paid her to keep quiet and sent her away. She raised the boy alone, never telling him who his father was. That boy was Mateo. Arthur discovered the truth by accident. In 2004, Mateo had just married Isabella. Arthur was cleaning out old filing cabinets from the warehouse, preparing for a renovation. He found a folder from the 1982 shopping center project, stuffed with old photos. One photo caught his eye. Victor Ortega standing next to a young woman, his arm around her waist. They were at a company picnic. The woman was pregnant. Arthur recognized her face. It was Ramona, Mateo's mother. He did the math. He looked at the date on the back of the photo, July 1980. Mateo was born in January 1981. Arthur felt the ground shift beneath him. He didn't say anything, not to Alina, not to Isabella, not to Mateo. He thought about what it would do to his daughter, to his new son-in-law, to the family they were building. He put the photo in a drawer and locked it. He told himself it didn't change anything, but it changed everything. For the next 20 years, Arthur watched Mateo climb the ladder at the company. He became vice president. He took over daily operations. He was brilliant, exactly like his biological father. And every promotion, every success, every family dinner with Victor's son, Arthur felt the weight of that photo pressing against his chest. The golden anniversary came on a cool October evening in 2024. 50 years married. Alina wore a pearl necklace. The dining room of their home was filled with candlelight and family. 80 guests, including their daughter Isabella, their grandchildren, their closest friends. and Mateo, who was about to make the toast. Mateo stood up, glass in hand. He looked across the room at Arthur and smiled. Then he began to speak about legacy, about the company Arthur built, about the man who taught him everything. But then his tone shifted. He started talking about the new direction of the business, about how Arthur's old-fashioned ways were holding them back, about how he, Mateo, had modernized the company. The room went quiet. Arthur's hand tightened on his wine glass. Mateo continued. He said Arthur didn't understand the new generation. He said the company needed fresh leadership. He looked straight at Arthur and said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "Some men build, other men get in the way." The room gasped. Alina put her hand on Arthur's arm. He didn't move. He waited. Then he stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single photograph. Old, creased, yellowed. He held it above his head so everyone could see. "This changes everything," he said, and the room fell into a silence that felt like the end of the world. The room didn't move. For 5 long seconds, no one breathed. 80 guests stared at the photograph in Arthur's hand, a faded image of a young pregnant woman and a man whose face everyone in that room recognized. Victor Ortega, the man who had spent 30 years trying to destroy Arthur's business. The man who had publicly called Arthur a thief, a liar, a fraud. The man who was now dead 7 years but whose ghost had just walked into this candle-lit dining room. Mateo's hand holding the wine glass began to tremble. He knew that face. He had seen it in old newspapers, in business magazines, in the way his mother's voice cracked when she mentioned Victor's name. But he had never connected the dots, until now. Arthur spoke again, his voice low and steady. "Mateo, your mother worked for Victor in 1980. She was his secretary. This photo was taken at a company picnic in July of that year. You were born in January of 1981. Victor Ortega is your biological father." Alina, seated beside Arthur, let out a sound, a half-gasp, half-sob. She had never seen that photo. Arthur had never told her, not once in 20 years. She turned to her husband, her face white, her pearl necklace catching the candlelight. "Arthur, you knew this. For how long?" Arthur didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Mateo. 20 years. I found this photo in an old filing cabinet in 2004. I didn't say anything because I thought it would destroy our family. Tonight, after what you said about me at this table, after you tried to humiliate me in front of everyone I love, I realized some truths cannot stay buried. Isabella stood up from her chair. Her chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound like a wound. "Dad, what are you doing? Why are you doing this here, in front of all these people?" "Because he wanted to destroy me in front of all these people," Arthur said, nodding toward Mateo. "He made a choice, I made mine." Mateo's face went through 3 stages in 10 seconds. First, disbelief, a tight-lipped shake of the head. Then anger, a flash of pure fire in his eyes. Then something else, something cold and calculating. He set down his wine glass with deliberate care. He straightened his tie. He looked around the room at the 80 stunned faces, at his wife Isabella, at his mother Ramona, who had gone pale in the corner, at the children who didn't understand but knew something terrible had happened. "Arthur, you're a liar," Mateo said. His voice was flat, controlled. "You've always been a liar. You found some old photo and invented a story to humiliate me. This is desperate. This is pathetic." "It's not invented," Arthur said. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a smaller envelope. "I had a DNA test done last month. You and we are not biologically related, but there are markers in your sample that match Victor Ortega's son. I hired a private investigator. He obtained a sample from Victor's other son, the one from his marriage. The match is conclusive." Mateo's face went white. The room began to buzz with whispers. Ramona stood up from her chair, her hands shaking. She walked toward Arthur, her heels clicking on the floor. "Arthur, please, please don't do this." "Do what, Ramona? Tell the truth. You had 30 years to tell your son who his father was. You chose to keep it secret. You chose to let him live a lie. You even let him marry my daughter without telling me, without telling anyone. Did you think it wouldn't come out?" Ramona began to cry. She didn't answer. She looked at her son, the son she had raised alone, the son who had grown into a man she was proud of, and she saw the look on his face, the look of a man whose entire identity had just been ripped away from him. The research is clear on what happens next. Studies show that discovering misattributed paternity triggers a radical transformation in both self and familial identity. The person who learns the truth experiences shock, fear, crisis, and a profound sense of loss, grieving either the missing genetic connection with the social father or the lost opportunity to connect with the biological father. In Mateo's case, he had lost both. The man he thought was his father had never existed. And the man who actually fathered him, Victor Ortega, had been Arthur's sworn enemy. The man Mateo had admired, respected, modeled himself after, was the son of the man who had tried to destroy everything Arthur built. But here is the pivot, the reframing Arthur never expected. Mateo walked around the table. He came face to face with Arthur, close enough that Arthur could smell his cologne, the same expensive brand Victor used to wear. Mateo leaned in and whispered so only Arthur could hear, "I've known about Victor for 3 years. My mother told me before she got sick. I've been in contact with his family. They've been helping me plan the takeover of your company. You played right into my hands tonight." Arthur's blood went cold. Mateo stepped back, turned to the room, and raised his voice. "Arthur is right. Victor Ortega is my biological father, and I am proud of it, because Victor Ortega built an empire from nothing. He was ruthless. He was successful. And Arthur Vasquez, the man who claims to be a builder, has been coasting on his reputation for the last decade. Tonight, Arthur thought he would destroy me, but he has only exposed his own bitterness. I am resigning from the company effective immediately, and I will be taking my shares, my clients, and my knowledge to start my own firm, with the backing of the Ortega family." The room erupted. Isabella screamed. Elena fainted. Arthur stood frozen, the photograph still in his hand, the candlelight flickering across his face, and he realized the worst possible truth. The trap he had set for Mateo had just snapped shut on him, and there was no way out. Elena was still unconscious when paramedics arrived. Isabella knelt beside her mother, crying, while Mateo stood at the door, coat on, keys in hand. He didn't look back. Arthur watched him leave, the photograph still clutched in his fingers, and for the first time in 50 years he felt truly old. The next 72 hours were a war. Mateo resigned from the company via email at 6:00 a.m. the following morning. By noon, 17 of Arthur's top employees had submitted their resignations, all of them accepting positions at a new firm called Ortega Reyes Development. By Friday, the bank called. The line of credit Arthur had used to finance a new warehouse project was suddenly under review. The Ortega family had made a call. The money was frozen. Arthur's attorney, a woman named Diane Cruz, sat with him in his office, the same office where he had built a business from nothing. She told him the truth. Mateo had been planning this for years. He had systematically documented the company's weaknesses, copied client lists, established relationships with suppliers, and cultivated a narrative that Arthur was past his prime. The golden anniversary speech was not a moment of drunken arrogance. It was a calculated ambush. Mateo had chosen that room, those 80 witnesses, that moment, to force Arthur into a public confrontation that would justify his departure and paint Arthur as a bitter, irrational old man protecting his empire. But then Diane said something that made Arthur's hands go cold. "There's something else. Your son-in-law had a private investigator tracking you for the last 6 months. He knew you had the photo. He knew you were planning to use it. He wanted you to pull that trigger at the worst possible moment. He needed you to humiliate yourself." That was the wait, it gets worse moment. Arthur had not sprung a trap. He had walked into one. Mateo had orchestrated the entire evening, including the insulting toast, specifically to provoke Arthur into revealing the photograph. It made Arthur look vengeful, unhinged, and petty in front of every major client and family member. But here is the deeper twist, the one that still haunts everyone involved. Ramona came to Arthur's house 3 days after the anniversary. She looked older, smaller, her eyes red. She sat at his kitchen table, the same table where Arthur had shared Sunday dinners with his daughter and son-in-law. She told him the truth about Victor Ortega, not the sanitized version. She told Arthur that Victor had assaulted her in 1980. She had never wanted the pregnancy. She had considered termination. But her family, her faith, her circumstances left her with no options. She raised Mateo in silence, in shame, in fear that Victor would one day reappear. She told Mateo about Victor only after she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, because she couldn't bear to die with the secret still buried. She told him, she said, because she hoped he would understand. She did not expect him to embrace Victor's legacy. She did not expect him to seek out Victor's legitimate son, Miguel Ortega, and form an alliance. Arthur listened. He poured her a glass of water. He said nothing about the company, about the betrayal, about the years of silence that had led to this catastrophe. He simply asked, "Does Mateo know that Victor assaulted you?" Ramona shook her head. "I never told him. I didn't want him to carry that. I wanted him to think his father was a successful man who made a mistake. I didn't realize he would use that lie to destroy you." Arthur closed his eyes. He had spent 20 years protecting this secret out of love for his daughter. He had spent 3 days watching the same secret dismantle everything he had built. And now he realized the secret was not even complete. The truth was worse than he had ever known. Then came the revelation that broke him completely. Isabella called him on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was flat, hollow. She told him she was moving out of the house she had shared with Mateo. She told him she had known about Mateo's plan for the last year. She had not stopped him. She had not told her father. She had convinced herself that it was better for everyone if Arthur stepped aside gracefully. She did not want to be caught between her husband and her father. She wanted the conflict to resolve itself without her having to choose. She chose silence, and silence was a choice. Arthur did not shout. He did not cry. He said, "I understand, Isabella. I hope you find peace." He hung up. He sat in the rocking chair by the window, the same chair where he had held her as a child, and he felt the foundation of his life crack. The company hemorrhaged. Within 60 days, Arthur Vasquez Construction lost 43% of its annual revenue. Mateo's new firm absorbed Arthur's largest contracts, including a municipal school project worth $12 million. The Ortega family's influence opened doors that Arthur could no longer reach. He was forced to lay off 32 employees, people who had worked for him for 15, 20 years. He stood in front of them in the warehouse, the same warehouse where he had started with a pickup truck, and he told them he was sorry. Some of them cried. Some of them cursed him. He took it. The court battle began 3 months later. Mateo filed a lawsuit claiming Arthur had breached fiduciary duty by failing to disclose a conflict of interest, the emotional animosity between Arthur and Victor Ortega that allegedly compromised business decisions for decades. The lawsuit was baseless but expensive. Arthur's legal fees mounted. The bank called in the line of credit. Arthur's home, the one he shared with Alina, was put up as collateral. Alina had a stroke the week before the preliminary hearing. Doctors said the stress triggered it. She survived but lost movement in her left side. Arthur sat by her hospital bed for 16 hours a day. He held her hand. He told her about the company, about the lawsuit, about Isabella's silence. Alina could not speak, but she squeezed his fingers. That squeeze was the only thing keeping him alive. And then came the final revelation, the one that recontextualized everything. Arthur received a letter, hand-delivered from Miguel Ortega. Inside was a single document, a DNA test result from a private lab. It showed a 99.97% probability that Arthur Vasquez was the biological father of Miguel Ortega, born 1982, the legitimate son of Victor Ortega and his wife, Sofia. Arthur read the letter 6 times. He had never met Sofia Ortega. He had never had an affair. He had never fathered a child with another woman, not once in 50 years of marriage. But the numbers did not lie. He called Diane Cruz. He called the lab. He called Miguel Ortega. Miguel refused to speak to him. He sent a single text: "You destroyed my father's reputation. Now you know how it feels." Arthur realized the truth. Victor Ortega had known about Arthur's DNA profile. He must have obtained it years ago, perhaps through a medical record or a discarded sample. He had fabricated a false paternity claim, planted the evidence, and instructed his son to use it as the ultimate revenge. The DNA test was a forgery, but Arthur could not prove it. And in the court of public opinion, the accusation alone was enough. Arthur was trapped. His company was dying. His wife was disabled. His daughter had abandoned him. His enemy had reached beyond the grave and planted a lie that would follow him for the rest of his life. The preliminary hearing began on a cold November morning. Arthur walked into the courthouse alone. Elena was in a rehabilitation center. Isabella did not attend. Mateo and Miguel sat 3 rows ahead of him, whispering. Arthur took his seat, pulled out a single photograph, not the one of Ramona and Victor, but a different one, a picture of himself and Victor at the original shopping center, groundbreaking in 1982, both of them smiling, both of them young. He stared at it and wondered if any of it had ever been real. And that is when the courtroom doors opened and a woman walked in who would change everything. She was small, gray-haired, dressed in black. She carried a manila envelope thick enough to hold a decade of secrets. Her name was Sofia Ortega, Victor's widow, and she was about to testify. Sofia Ortega walked to the witness stand. She was 74 years old, dressed in black, her gray hair pinned back. She did not look at her son Miguel. She did not look at Mateo. She looked directly at Arthur and she nodded once. The judge asked her to state her relationship to the case. She said, "I am the widow of Victor Ortega. I am here to tell the truth about my husband's obsession with Arthur Vasquez." She opened the manila envelope. Inside were letters, bank records, and a notarized statement from a private investigator Victor had hired in 2004. The investigator had been instructed to obtain Arthur's DNA by any means necessary. Victor had wanted to destroy Arthur's reputation even after his own death. The forged paternity test was the final move. Sofia testified that Victor had confessed everything to her on his deathbed. He had admitted to planting false evidence, to manipulating Mateo through Miguel, to orchestrating the takeover of Arthur's company from beyond the grave. She had stayed silent out of loyalty, but after seeing Arthur's wife in a hospital bed, after watching the lawsuit drag on, she could not remain complicit any longer. The courtroom went silent. Mateo's face turned gray. Miguel Ortega stood up and walked out without a word. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice. Arthur was cleared of all accusations. But the damage was already done. The company was hemorrhaging. The bank was calling. Arthur walked out of the courthouse into November rain, and for the first time in 50 years, he didn't know what came next. That night, Isabella appeared at his door. She was crying. She said she had made a terrible mistake, that she had been a coward, that she had lost her husband and almost lost her father. Arthur listened. He did not forgive her yet, but he did not turn her away. Elena came home from the rehabilitation center 2 weeks later. She could walk with a cane. She could speak in short sentences. The first thing she said to Arthur was, "I knew about the photo. I saw it 20 years ago. I thought it would break us. I was wrong." The silence almost broke us. Arthur realized then that Elena had been carrying her own secret all those years. She had chosen to trust him, to let him decide when to reveal the truth. That trust, he understood, was the only thing in his life that had not been corrupted. The company did not survive. Arthur sold the remaining assets to a competitor. He used the proceeds to pay off his employees' severance. He kept nothing for himself. He moved into a smaller house with Elena, a 2-bedroom with a garden where she could sit in the sun. Mateo disappeared for 6 months. When he resurfaced, he was alone. His partnership with Miguel had dissolved. The Ortega family had cut him off. He came to Arthur's new house, stood on the doorstep and said, "I know everything now. About my mother, about Victor, about what I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I understand." Arthur looked at him for a long time. He saw the son he had raised, the son who was not his blood but who had learned everything from him. He saw the man who had tried to destroy him. He also saw a man who had been manipulated since birth, a pawn in a game he never chose to play. Arthur said, "Come inside, your mother-in-law made soup." And then the final surprising detail emerged, one that recontextualized everything. Ramona, Mateo's mother, called Arthur the next morning. She said she had found a letter Victor had written to her in 1981, before Mateo was born. In the letter, Victor admitted that he had tampered with Arthur's birth control years earlier, ensuring that Arthur and Alina would never have a son. Victor had wanted to cripple Arthur's line of succession, to ensure that Arthur's business would one day fall to someone else. The letter was proof of a decades-long conspiracy that reached into the most intimate corners of Arthur's life. Arthur sat down heavily. He realized Victor had not only tried to take his company, his reputation, his daughter's marriage. Victor had also stolen the son Arthur never knew he could have had. Alina came into the room. She saw the letter in his hand. She did not ask what it said. She simply sat beside him and took his hand. Arthur folded the letter and put it away. He would not show it to anyone. Some truths he had learned were not meant to be weaponized. They were meant to be buried so the living could move forward. He looked out the window at the oak tree he had planted 30 years ago. It was strong. The foundation held. Arthur Vasquez lives in a smaller house now. The oak tree he planted 30 years ago still stands, but he can only see it from the kitchen window, not the living room. Alina sits in the garden on good days. She reads. She watches the birds. She does not talk about Victor Ortega anymore. Isabella comes over every Sunday. She brings her children. They play in the yard while Arthur grills chicken and Alina supervises from her chair. Mateo does not come. He sends a card on Arthur's birthday, signed with his full name, no return address. Arthur keeps them in a drawer, unopened. What lingers is not the victory or the loss. It is the question that haunts every family where a secret has been buried for decades. What else do we not know? The research confirms that misattributed paternity affects between 1% and 4% of the population. That means millions of people are living with a biological truth they have not yet discovered. Millions of families are one DNA test away from a revelation that will rearrange their entire history. The golden anniversary photograph still exists. Arthur kept it. He keeps it in the same drawer as Victor's confession letter, a reminder that the truth is a tool, not a weapon. It can build or destroy. The difference is in the hands that hold it. Arthur turned 73 last spring. He does not regret the revelation at the anniversary dinner. He regrets the 20 years of silence that preceded it. He regrets believing that protecting a secret was the same as protecting a family. He learned that foundations crack not from what is exposed, but from what is buried beneath them. The Vasquez construction sign still hangs above the old warehouse. A new company occupies the building now, but the sign remains, painted over, a ghost of what was built. Arthur passes it on his way to the grocery store. He looks at it. He does not stop. The world is full of photographs waiting to be found, of truths waiting to be spoken, of families waiting to learn who they really are. The question is not whether the secrets will surface. The question is what you will do when they do. If this story made you think about the secrets in your own family, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. The foundation held, but only because Arthur finally let the truth in.